Okay, good evening. I apologize for the late start. We did have a previous meeting that lasted a little bit longer. So I'd like to call the city council work session of Thursday, March 5th to order and ask for approval of the agenda. All in favor?
Yes.
Okay, so first on the agenda, we have public comment. If you would like to make public comment, you will come up to the podium, state your name and mailing address. Keep your comments kind and respectful and try to keep them under 3 minutes. So is anyone in the audience that would like to make public comment? Is there anyone on Zoom? If you would raise your hand, please. Anybody?
No.
No? Okay. Okay, thank you. So our one item of discussion today is public input for 2502, which is the city of Cannon Beach request for text amendments to the zoning codes relevant to housing. Okay, thank you.
I'm Jeff Adams, Community Development Director for City of Cannon Beach. And this is ZO, zoning ordinance 2502, City of Cannon Beach request for text amendments to multiple sections of chapter 17, zoning relevant to housing. Proposed text amendments will be reviewed against the criteria of municipal code section 1794 amendments and the statewide planning code. And I just want to briefly, give you a little summary and background. The City of Cannon Beach Planning Commission held its initial evidentiary hearing regarding proposed changes to municipal code 17 zoning related to housing on June 27, 2025, continuing to the discussion to July 24, August 28, recommending 2502 on September 25th, 2025 for City Council's consideration. And I want to just say that this began honestly back around 2020 when these discussions were first started. We spoke about it at the DRB and the planning commission. I went back in my notes back in even 2019 and 2020, talking about many of these aspects of this language. And so the discussions about, how long have we been looking into the housing matters and other concerns regarding housing, parking, we've always other things that feed into it. We started that in 2020 at a number of meetings in 2020, and I can happily say I left and came back. It's still here and ready to go. Okay, but I'm happy that Marcy's still on board and still working with us on this, and I. Just want to hand it off to her and let her take it. I'll be here and be happy to answer questions along the way, and also we'll probably speak up there a few moments and discuss some things, but go ahead.
Okay. First of all, can you all hear me? Yay. But I'll also say that I'm recovering from a cold, so I might be drinking lots of water. I might have to take a little break here there. I want to introduce my partner in this hearing or this work session, Kevin Oliver. And he is, you remember him from the charrette. Those of you who participated in that, he's participating tonight because he's been steadily involved in this project and is really familiar with the issues. Can we go to the slides, Robert? Okay, just go to the first one. So the items that I have to cover tonight are what our goal in 2024 was, what kind of an overview of what zoning can do and cannot do, and then go into some detail in what's in the package, and then talk about what you might be able to go further on. I'd also like to talk about design review and clear and objective design and development standards, since that is a very big part of this work. And we haven't really been able to talk about it very much. And then we'll talk about the path to move forward and have a discussion. So the goal in 2024, next slide, thanks, Robert. the issues that we set out to address. And also I'm gonna cover, some things that some of you, well, you probably all heard about the survey at the last meeting, but given that this is also a meeting for the public, I want to go over some things, so you might be hearing things twice about the survey and the proposal. So in January 2024, with your direction, we began to address specific gaps between the comprehensive plan policy and the implementation policies that the community development ordinance is responsible for. You know, these two documents work together. The comprehensive plan says what the policy is, and then it's the role of zoning for your development ordinance to make those goals happen. And we, through the audit, we found that there were a number of gaps. And these are things that Jeff refers to as mind the gap. We illustrated them through some tests during that audit phase, and we called them reality checks. And I just want to go through a couple of them. These will look familiar because we've talked about these before. So the first one is up on the screen now. And it's the gap between what the comprehensive plan policy says and what the CDO requires regarding parking, especially as it affects downtown. And you'll remember that we talked about how the requirement for parking today would mean that if any of the village character buildings that are so special to Cannon Beach's character were destroyed somehow in a fire or a tsunami or something like that, they would have to be rebuilt to your current standards, and the parking requirements are quite onerous, and you would not have, you wouldn't be able to rebuild the buildings that are there today. So we identified this as a major gap that needs to be fixed. It does affect housing also, because it makes it impossible not only to rebuild a commercial structure, but it makes it kind of impossible to build any housing downtown with the parking requirements that you require. Another gap, so the next slide, is between what the comprehensive plan policy says about village character and what your CDO requires on shape and size and character of development. So again, we did a reality check on this too, and we looked at on the left, these materials were prepared during and pre-charrette for the housing. On the left, we did an analysis of a building that everyone is familiar with, the White Bird Gallery downtown. And then in Midtown, we looked at the Cannon Beach Hotel and the Bald Eagle Coffee Shop. And we said, these are buildings that we really want to be able to make possible. Everyone likes these buildings. These seem to be very much in the village character that the comprehensive plan calls for. And people generally support these building forms, but could you build these buildings today if you had to provide all the parking that's required or meet other standards? And we found that no, you couldn't. And we're going to go into the graphic on the right hand side of the slide later. Kevin's going to talk specifically about it because we did a test of all of the standards that apply to that site. We used the gas station site as a scenario, and these four examples kind of going around in a circle. The upper left one with the most orange shows what you would get if you had to follow all the landscape standards and the parking standards, meet the density or stay under the density limitations, and meet the required commercial activity 50% of the building. It means you don't have much building. Now, there's certainly no room for housing, at least not a feasible building. So Kevin's going to talk about that more, but that was another gap that we verified, another reality check. Now, I'm going to spend a little time on this one. Forgive me for the slide being so small, but I wanted to provide just a reminder of what this was about. It happened during the days when Jeff was here. We did a survey with just the group that was on the Joint Commission at that time. Many of you participated in this little survey where we asked you to rate the items that make up a building or a site, the landscaping, etc., in terms of how it contributed to village character. We were trying to get a sense of the gap that exists between what the comprehensive plan says about village character. It says things like Cannon Beach will continue to be a small town where the characteristics of the village are fostered and promoted. And that gap between what then the community development ordinance requires. The only clear and objective provisions in CDO is 17.9.065 architectural design elements. But before I go there, let me just explain that. I know Cannon Beach has relied on design review over the years to make sure that buildings and development meets your character, the Cannon Beach character. But we are in an era now where housing, it applies to statements on housing. Provisions for housing must be clear and objective. You can't any longer subject multi-dwelling or even a house to design review. Clear and objective means that the provision must be measurable and answerable with a yes or no answer. For example, you can say, yes, applicant, you have provided 5 of these 12 items on this list on your facade. Or you can say, yes, applicant, you have met the standard for this dimension from the front property line. So I'm very comfortable that we can write clear and objective provisions that are very in tune with Cannon Beach's character. But the only thing you currently have on the book says requires 2 items out of a menu. This is again 17.9.065 architectural design elements. It says dormers, gables, recessed entry, covered porch, bay window, building offset, deck with railing or planters and benches, or a garage, carport, or other accessory structure. I don't think this goes as far as you need it to go for clear and objective standards. No.
It's pretty much a box. That's about the only thing that it won't be left.
And I think Kevin shares this feeling too, that it is odd to place garage carport on the same plane kind of as a dormer or a gable. So these are not the same things, and in fact, a garage, if it's not well placed or well designed, can detract from the village character. So can too much parking and pavement. So we need to give this a little more thought, but it should come along with the housing. Anyway, we did a survey with you, the Joint Commission as our test. We asked you to rate these items that contribute to village character: building size, building shape, architecture of the street facing walls or facade, landscaping between the street and the building, building materials and treatments. And then we asked an open-ended question to describe other things that you thought were important. And the top rated items were building size, number 1, architecture of the street facing facade, 2, and 3, building materials and treatments. On the open-ended question, people put things like compatibility is very important, walkability is very important, fitting in with the natural environment, color, and someone said building materials, facade, building shape, it's the whole package. So that's you telling us, small group, not the public, but you telling us what you thought was important to village character. It was very helpful. And it tells me that we need to write a more complete set of standards. Okay, so numbers, go to the next slide. We also did a little test back in the time that Jeff was here, where we said, well, what about housing generally and affordability? And the comp plan says home for households from a variety of incomes and ages. And we said, is there a gap between what the comp plan says and what the community development ordinance allows? And we suspected there was a major gap, but we didn't have all the data yet, and we hadn't analyzed the code to such an extent yet. But we did use these 2 stories from other small towns to illustrate the kinds of housing that would provide better for households from a variety of incomes and ages. And we put little names on these articles. One was a woman named Eileen, we gave her a name, who built an ADU for herself while she rented out her main house because she is aging and she wants to stay in this community. And neighbor 2, these are both stories that were featured on this slide. A worker, we named him Nate, who wanted to live in the town where he works. And using available data, we figured he would have to work at least 82 hours a week to be able to afford a home in Cannon Beach. So, next. We, with your permission, we set out to survey the community to get, real reality check. How close was the city to providing kind of housing that met the comprehensive plan policy and also met people's needs today? And I have, excuse me for repeating this, but I just want to make sure that everyone who watches these slides later understands the survey was very important. First of all, we presented it in English and Spanish, and we received 281 responses in a month's time, which is unusual, but it's also extremely unusual in a town sized Cannon Beach. We found 80% of respondents live in Cannon Beach, 60% own their own homes, 36% rent, 4% have some other arrangement. 70% of respondents work, 25% of respondents own a building, a business in Cannon Beach, and the average household size is 2. That was what people offered us about their living situation. Then we asked people for their opinions on certain questions. And one question was about whether Cannon Beach was living up to its policy to encourage the development of housing which meets the needs of a variety of age and income groups, as well as special needs. That's the comprehensive plan language. And 81% of respondents said no. We also asked if there was a lack of affordable housing in Cannon Beach, which we helped people understand was defined as HUD defines it, where you have to spend more than 30% of your income on housing. And 89% of respondents said there is a lack of affordable housing in Cannon Beach. Okay, so I'd say that was another gap we suspected was there, and it was verified. The survey told us a lot. And then if we could go to the next slide, around about this time, the county was conducting its housing needs analysis and plans inventory, if you remember that. And we, with a holistic variables, Saucet County, we collected this data into a visual form. And we presented it along with the survey, or I should say, we presented along with the survey because it adds another layer of direness to the situation, which is that in Cannon Beach, so these little pie charts represent each city. We have Warrenton, Astoria, Earhart, Seaside, all of Saucet County, and then we have Cannon Beach at the very lowest part of the map. In Cannon Beach, it has an unusually high number of homes that are not even available for people to live in full time because they are only available for seasonal use. That's more than 75% of homes are committed to seasonal use and short-term rentals, meaning that they are vacant much of the year or not available for long-term renting or owners residing in Cannon Beach full time. And you see how that's bigger percentage than any of the other cities in the North Coast area. Okay, so with all this information, we set out to amend the zoning code. And before we go into what the proposal does, I want to just spend some time talking about what zoning can do and cannot do. So housing policies like a public benefits policy or a vacancy tax, a lease to rentals program, or systems development charges. These are examples of housing policies that really will help the zoning code amendments, but they're not zoning code amendments either. So they're not part of this project per se, but we have tried to be very partnering with the people who can develop the policies, with Elisa and now Jeff. So people have talked about community land trusts. These are really great. They enable affordable ownership housing. However, it's not a zoning issue. We can't address that through this zoning project. Really, our job with the zoning code is to make this the right thing. That is, thing that's going to fix these gaps and really realize your comprehensive plan to the fullest extent. The right thing is what the zoning code should be made to the easiest thing to do. And we also, kind of going along with that, want to stabilize the market control short-term rentals, level the playing field to help regular housing compete with luxury housing. And then the next slide, and many of you, I think, have studied this graphic that Alyssa created while she was at Housing County. She has sort of separated out in the columns, the 0 to 30% area median income, 30 to 60%, 60 to 80%, and 80 to 100%, 120% area median income, and the kinds of households that fall into those affordability categories, and then kind of jobs they might have, and the kinds of rents or housing they can afford. And obviously, if you're going to provide housing to all the people that live in your community, you have to utilize all these tools to provide for all these income categories. She's laid out along the bottom row, in those bullet points, a lot of tools, what she would call tools. And I just outlined in orange the ones in her tools that are zoning actions. And you'll see that almost none of those zoning actions touch the 0 to 30% line. What we're really able to control is the things that are affecting 30% to 60%, not to 80 and 120%, and everything in between. With zoning actions. So I circled those just to again reiterate that we're concentrating in this code rewrite project on the zoning tools. Yeah, I'm gonna turn it over to Kevin to talk about affordable housing strategies generally. If we could go to the next slide, Robert. Oh, no.
This might be the older slide.
I'm gonna make the old slideshow, Jen,
Yeah.
what did you put the new one out there, right? Yeah, that's on the website.
Is that the one in the packet or the one that's below under additional?
It's an additional.
Yeah, there's an updated one that's on the website.
It was a last minute.
I was wondering what was different, I was like, I see anything different.
There's really not much.
Yeah, only 3 slides.
I have it up on my computer if sharing my screen is an option.
It's here now.
Well, first of all, oh, it's loaded now, but it's good to see you all again and see you all for the first time, some of you. And thanks for having me. So I'll just want to highlight some of the kind of the typical affordable housing strategies. These are ones that have been established and shown to work to some degree. And so I want to kind of highlight those as a way we can think about strategies to achieve some of those comprehensive plan goals. And so first I wanted to highlight the current approach, which is represented kind of on the far end here. You know, if you look at Alyssa's chart, hers ends after 120. That's the area where we're looking at kind of affordable, low income housing, workforce housing even. But once you're beyond 120%, we're not usually targeting those groups because they have plenty of buying power. But you can see this chart kind of zooms out. It has to zoom out in order to capture what your current market is doing. And there's just one data point. This isn't detailed data analysis. This is just kind of a representative diagram more than anything. But A here represents the median home sale price according to the Cannon Beach Housing Supply Inventory from April 2025, which was $1,160,000. Quick math, with 20% down, that is affordable to someone that's making just under 3 times the median income in Cannon Beach. So you guys are all aware of this. I think you probably feel it when you look at the housing listings in your community. But the housing is expensive, and it's not the current strategy is not achieving those goals according to this quick analysis. So some other strategies that we've seen that work are middle housing. So you can kind of see there's a market shift that happens with middle housing. It allows housing prices to come down a bit to reach maybe the 120 percent through maybe 150 or so. There's still quite a range that these housing types can serve. But the main point is that by enabling middle housing, we've seen that housing prices can come down $250,000 to $300,000 compared to comparable single family housing in the neighborhood. So there is a real market impact. It isn't going to get you affordable housing that is affordable to the low income folks or even moderate and maybe some moderate income folks, but it's still new housing, and it's definitely impacting the market and making housing more affordable. In addition to that, there's a strategy called cross subsidy, which essentially enables market rate, more expensive housing to help subsidize more affordable housing. And when I talk about affordable housing, I think it can be a little confusing. Sometimes there's some terms of art. There's capital A affordable housing, which is is oftentimes tax subsidy housing, but the critical element is it's income restricted. The cost of rent, the cost of the mortgage, or the sales price of the home is not driven by the market. It's driven by an income restriction and what is considered affordable to that income band. And so in order to, but the lowercase a affordable housing is about creating more naturally affordable housing options. And so cross subsidies where you do a little bit of both, right? It's like where you're adding additional units, some are market rate, in order to essentially offset the financial loss of creating an affordable capital A affordable housing income restricted unit. And oftentimes that's mostly limited by how much additional much additional housing, how much additional development is politically feasible to say how low that income can reach into. If you're willing to do what San Diego is doing, and that they're allowing infinite number of ADUs, and I think you get an additional ADU for every affordable ADU beyond 3. And so there's people going in with 16 and 20 unit apartment complexes that are apparently ADUs. That's the extreme model. Most communities don't do that. But that does allow you, usually it's going to require, if it is a market rate unit, it's going to be probably a middle housing unit type. So you are kind of additionally getting some of that and impacting the market, but ideally you're producing a income restricted unit as well, or another unit that is part of a public benefit program, like lease to locals or something else. But that requires that those units are those other units are significant revenue producers in order to offset that financial loss. On the tax funded side, that's a lot of what Alyssa Girdler was looking at, and a lot of her zoning considerations are really about making sure zoning doesn't get in the way of those projects. Those projects are going to be critical to serving the lowest income folks in your community. They are, the financing for these projects is competitive and very limited, and typically the housing that it enables is are 150 plus apartment buildings, just based on the financing mechanisms. But it is really important to remove barriers to those, because those are a desperately needed housing type. And so I want to kind of talk about how zoning interacts with promoting those more affordable housing strategies. So Marcy kind of highlighted some of the major points. The stabilizing the market is one, right? You're not going to be able to stabilize the market with capital A affordable housing. They're serving a part of the market that is not served by the housing market generally. That's why it requires public subsidy. You guys have an unstable market right now. It's essentially it's way out of reach for the people who live there or need to work there. And so you guys could definitely benefit from stabilizing the market, and that means building enough housing to meet the housing demand. Obviously, you guys have some very specific challenges that Marcy highlighted related to short-term rentals and luxury housing, second homes. And so in addition to that, controlling short-term rentals is really important, like she said, because that housing product is really a business that creates a whole lot more revenue than regular folks can compete with on the housing market. The other parts of what zoning can do is help multiple households pool their buying power to collectively compete with luxury housing. And what that is essentially you guys have expensive land. Your land is constrained because you have so many beautiful natural resources surrounding you. That has put pressure on the land, and so the cost of land is expensive. It's expensive to the point where it only makes sense as a development to build luxury housing if only one unit is allowed, or even if 2 units are allowed, oftentimes. And so what this strategy and how it relates to zoning is it allows you multiple households, 2, 3, 4 households to split the land cost. And it can make smaller homes feasible on neighborhood lots. And so there's a rule of thumb in development that the land cost should essentially be between 1/3 and 1/5 of the final sales cost of the land. So if we're, I think I have seen in your guys' market some raw land of around $215,000. The bare minimum that the final house would sell for is going to be upwards of 700,000, but probably closer to $1 million in order to justify the development of that property. If in order to sell for those prices, developers, builders are going to have to build a lot of square footage to be able to sell a house in order to justify that land, right? It's a different kind of market. And so by allowing more units on that land, they're not only splitting that underlying per unit share of the land cost, but it also enables those lots to support smaller units, because they can essentially pool their buying power, have lower construction costs per unit while still producing a product that justifies the cost of the land. Another piece of this is other than kind of reducing the construction burden, the construction cost burden, the land burden, there's regulatory burden. And a lot of times communities have more regulatory burden on smaller houses like middle housing than they do on large houses. That can be design review, like y'all have. That can be by way of a site plan review process versus a residential review process. If it's easier to do a single large mansion than it is to do 3 small, more modest houses on the same lot, people are going to build the mansion in most cases, because those regulatory burdens can really drive up their carrying costs on their project. It's thousands and thousands of dollars every month that is increased as they're waiting for their permits. And so the other thing that zoning can do is more on the capital A affordable housing side, and that's to provide incentives for public benefit programs and for income restricted affordable housing projects. So not only is it about clearing the burdens that kind of overburden these types of housing that Alyssa identified in her chart, but it's also you can provide additional benefits. You can provide development bonuses, density bonuses. You can relieve regulatory burden. You can allow you can allow different paths toward approval of these projects as well. And so it's really important to consider those as well, the regulatory burden, as well as kind of the additional benefits that are offered when capital A housing is provided. Go
Thanks,
ahead.
Kevin. Okay, so I would like to talk about the proposed amendments. I'm going to break this into a few different parts, to talk about kind of the code concepts or the principles behind what we're trying to do with the code amendments. Take a little breakout to explain FAR, because it is hard to understand, but it's something that we're relying on quite a bit in the amendments. And I'd like to remind you that we have previous discussion of public benefits. I'm going to go through some excuse me, details presentation that was in the packet. Next. So some of the principles that we relied on were the whole philosophy that Kevin just outlined was certainly one, but physically there was also this form-based approach that if we're very specific about where on the site, how big on the site, where are the important things to regulate the facade, what are the important things to protect trees and wetlands, how do we do that in a way that's clear and objective? And we laid out a form-based approach that was very can be specific. Could we be more flexible about the number and type of dwellings on the lot? Could we say that if you have a form this size, do you really care if there are 2 or 4 units in it, or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4? So another concept was that the development standards should be much clearer about what the desired board is, so there's some work we need in that regard right now. And an example of this would be to allow multiple dwellings on a lot up to their current 0.6 FAR. So you could still use FAR, but instead of 1, and you must do multiple. Another principle was to establish a clear and objective design standards. Another objective was to encourage more housing options instead of prohibiting them. And another was to set up a public benefits program and to reduce parking requirements. So just to touch on public benefits for a moment. Can we go to the next slide? When we talked about this in 2022, we prepared these diagrams and we showed what the current FAR and other regulations allow on site right now. It's this lightly outlined shape that's sort of ghosted in on each site. On the top row is a 10,000 square foot lot. On the bottom row is a 5,000 square foot lot. And this shows what would happen if we limited the floor area ratio so that it was more kind of right sized for, right now you can build that to that almost that entire outline shape. But what if we actually reduce the allowed floor area ratio to something that was more in keeping with what people expected, say, in keeping with the survey results that building size is very important. And this is just to illustrate that this was a concept that we talked about earlier, and I also want to point out that there are a lot of lots in R1 and R2 that are bigger than 5,000 square feet. So every time that we talk about a floor area ratio, we're generally talking about what's applicable to a 5,000 square foot lot, because that's what the minimum lot size in those zones is. But 45% almost of lots in those 2 zones are greater than that. So that just means that that would affect your floor area ratio that an owner is entitled to. Okay, so let's just talk about floor area ratio quickly. This diagram makes it very clear. This is from the state's middle housing guide. It says that floor area ratio means the amount of floor area of a building or structure in relation to the amount of site area expressed in square feet. And it shows kind of like a building that's been split apart in 2 floors, and A1, floor 1, A2 is floor 2, the combined total square feet of those. is divided by the site area of feet. And that's your floor area ratio. For example, a floor area ratio of 0.7 to 1 means 0.7 square feet of floor area for every 1 square foot of site area. Okay, so now we can, if you don't mind, go through what is in the amendments, and I know the amendments are very hard to track and read because they're track change amendments, they're pink text showing in underlining what's new and struck out text what's going, and your code is very hard to read even as it is, and this makes it even harder. So I've tried to create a simpler table to compare what you have in your code today and what we propose to do. So and I divided it into things that I think are kind of community priorities. So in terms of housing options, today, you subject ADUs to design review. Under the proposed amendments, we would exempt ADUs from design review. Today, you limit ADUs to 600 square feet. And based on the planning commission's review, they agreed to raise that limit to 800 square feet. Duplexes are allowed in R2. Under the proposed amendments, public benefit dwellings and ADUs would be exempt from certain development standards and parking requirements. And the new dwellings would not be eligible for short-term rental licensing. In terms of form or development standards like height, FAR, lot, setbacks and things like that, today, the maximum FAR 0.6 applies to all dwellings and ADUs. In the proposed amendments, the maximum floor area ratio of 0.6, there's no change, but it applies to all the dwellings on the lot, except ADUs are exempt from the site FAR calculation. And again, I'll just remind people that the larger the lot, the more square footage you're going to have. Almost 35% of lots are larger than 5,000 square feet. The maximum height at 24 stays the same. Now, I kind of missed one thing about the FAR. On the proposed amendments, the FAR for certain housing types is limited. We put a limit of FAR on a single dwelling. And we put a limit on duplexes in R2.
Change the existing limit to a different limit.
Correct.
The way this is written, it looks like you can have a 0.6 FAR for a single family house. Plus you can have, an ADU of addition. I'm not clear. I thought there was a reduced FAR for a single family dwelling.
Yeah, 0.46. FAR for certain housing types is limited.
Okay, so
Single
just the
dwelling,
way it's written,
0.46.
the first sentence makes it sound, it says, no change. Well, there is a change.
But the total FAR that's available to use if you build multiple units does not change. You
Right.
can still reach that 0.6 FAR.
Right, well, I guess the way that's written, I don't think it's clear, I really don't.
I agree.
And I do think it's important to emphasize that we have not reduced the FAR, but what we're trying to encourage is that there are more smaller units built into it.
But if somebody was building a single family dwelling with no FAR, with no ADU on it. And no, no smaller units. It
Well,
looks like,
that's what the second bullet is.
I know, but I'm saying it's just not fair on the first bullet. I think this needs to be rewritten a little bit so it's clear that maybe even change the position of those.
Change it.
I'm sure it will be
Yeah,
in the code.
And
I'm sure it will be in the code.
Because
Good
people
advice.
reading it will be confused. I mean, we got some letters, people are super confused, so. Yeah,
I'll say this is a pretty confusing part of the proposal.
I know, yeah, I know it is.
We do need to find a way to illustrate and explain this better. I appreciate your feedback.
I mean, maybe it would, in the presentation, I see what people are reacting to, but that second bullet point could just be the first bullet point and then it's
Yeah.
solved.
That would solve it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
In terms of setbacks, the front now is 15, side is 5, and the rear is 15. And we changed that for public benefit dwellings and ADUs, they can now have a 10-foot setback on the front, but otherwise the signage is the same. So in terms of village character, design review is required for ADUs today. in the proposed amendments, design ADUs would be exempt from design review. But do need to update the development standards, the design standards.
And you anticipate that going hand in hand with these design, because I would never feel comfortable with approving this without also having new design standards in there, because I could just see, I could see what could happen in the space of 2 years if we don't have them hand in hand.
Yes.
Well, the problem we also have is the state law prohibits us from having ADUs
Right.
go through a design review
Right.
process,
Yeah.
so we're opening ourselves for liability by
Right,
delaying.
no, I'm not saying we should
Yeah.
have, I don't saying we should apply this, I'm saying that it has to go hand in hand with our new standards for development. Or what a place needs to look like, so you can't just have a bunch of square bottles or the ship of floors, you know.
Well, this is why I put in that, you might appreciate this, Councilor Kerr, I put establish more robust set of design standards for village character, clear and objective.
Yeah.
It's in italics because it's a little uncertain what the timing of that would be, but I agree with you. I think we agree with you that it is important to this effort.
I have a question with the proposal that's the ZO 2502. Is it possible under the current notices that are out there to make adjustments to that as a council? That increase how robust those standards are, or does that go further out of the scope than what was approved? through the CD?
I would defer to Missy on that question. We'll ask her, I think it's a very good question. We would have that answer, because we'll talk about path forward into this, and that is definitely great. Got to be forefront of what we're having to do. That's,
Because I know we can't change it that drastically from what the PLCD's already reviewed.
All right, so on parking, just a comparison of what you require today, 2 parking spaces for a single dwelling. That stays the same. Today, you require an ADU to have a space, but we removed that, which I think is very good for what I've seen around the state, the parking requirements of major returns. Then you also required 2 spaces for each duplex, in a duplex unit, so that's 4 spaces, and we reduced that to just 1 space per duplex unit. And that's, I think, also gonna be very good for the village character, because 4 spaces on the site, that's a lot of pavements, that's a lot of garages and driveways. We also have a tree code relief, concept for public benefit dwellings that would go along with the tree code. All right, so, and because of, kind of what you can see compared to what you have today, what we're proposing, I'm hoping that it's somewhat clear to you, and is also repeating some of what Kevin talked about. Because of the way that your zoning code works, most of the housing that you're getting today, most of what is being built is in the 80 to 120 and above, as Kevin was saying, like, that's why you have to add on those additional columns to the right. All right, so you remember the summary of amendments that we developed to identify the different square footages that you could have in each division, and I'm gonna skip over this in the interest of time. But again, I want, if anyone in the public goes back to read these tables, keep in mind that lot sizes are not all 5,000 square feet. Okay, so we could go to the picture of housing. This was a graphic, I'm just carrying it up here for some relief from words for a moment. We did some models during the charrette that showed what your building envelope is according to the floor area ratio, the height limits, the setbacks. This would be affected quite a bit by having to provide parking, but that orange shape, what we call the Jello mold, is kind of the building envelope that you could build into. It's a house could be that big. So we were testing some things that made their way into the final proposal. If you look at the upper right illustrations, you can see that the white house shape steps ahead of the orange Jello mold. That's taking advantage of a 5 foot, decrease in setback. And you also see that those dormers are popping up above the Jello mold. That's the dormers, the habitable space in dormers that, can take advantage of additional height as long as it's inside of the roof. So those are things that were included in the amendments. Now I'm gonna go over what's in the downtown zone, the limited commercial C1 zone. Today, for housing options, they're subject to some severe restrictions. Residential uses cannot exceed 50% of a floor area. That means you can't have any buildings downtown that are just housing. As someone said, at our last meeting, you couldn't have an apartment building like that in Northwest Portland in downtown Cannon Beach, for example. The ground floor would have to have commercial. That's a serious barrier for housing. Non-residential uses are required, and minimum lot size limitations severely limit the residential density. The proposed amendments say that residential uses are allowed to exceed 50%, and standalone apartment buildings, like the Northwest Portland apartment building, is permitted at the rear of the site. But because commercial is very important to Hemlock, and this only applies to Hemlock. No, sorry, this only applies to Spruce. We said that there still has to be commercial in the street facing building on the river court. But the minimum lot size limitations do not apply. However, all of the development standards of the building envelope stays the same. And the new dwellings are not eligible for short-term rental. Maximum height stays the same. There's 3 feet today, 3 feet of landscaping between the sidewalk and the building frontage. We propose 3 feet of landscaping can be met through a menu of options that invite some more vertical landscaping options. And retail uses are required, but the requirement is limited to buildings facing the street. Today, I'd say the village character downtown is the result of design review. But in the future, residential development downtown is going to have to be able to go through a clear and objective path. And we don't have that right now. The parking required for studio has not changed. I'm sorry, the parking requirements have not changed at all. Yes, okay, so I think that's enough for that. That's what made it through the final amendment package, but we had bigger aspirations during the charrette. And I think it's time to revisit those. One was to eliminate parking requirements. The other,
Downtown.
yes, downtown and for Boston. On Hemlock, allow a 3rd story within a dormer. Allow residential only buildings behind courtyards at the rear of the site. And eliminate density restrictions. We've done most of those to an extent, but we've also made the area where they apply extremely limited. So I think we could go further. So next slide. Just want to remind you that we studied the downtown a lot, and we referred to it in our modeling during the charrette. For the Whitebury Gallery photo at the upper left, just to talk about how housing in a 3rd story does exist on the 2nd and 3rd story, and a 3rd story does exist in the roofs. And then I want to actually ask Kevin to talk more about these models that we did to test those ideas in the community.
Yeah, so this is the kind of across the street view of some of these alternative models that you'll see kind of zoomed out in 3D in the following slide. But the idea is that that these dormers actually can provide quite a bit of kind of architectural character, especially in new buildings, and so it may be something you want to promote. The first one is showing, okay, what if you maintained a 2-story height at the street, but allowed 3 stories at the back? The second one is promoting the dormers in a 1/2 story, which I would call 2.5 story. And then the third one is exploring, maintaining that 24-foot height at the street, but then allowing a third story setback from that, 10 to 15 feet. So it doesn't have as much presence on the street. You still maintain that kind of village scale while allowing additional housing units. And 3-story and even 2.5-story is a kind of a sweet spot for natural housing affordability, because it allows for more affordable housing types, especially those walk-up buildings. You know, you don't necessarily have to have an elevator in these residential buildings, as long as you do have some ground floor accessible units. But you know, it's a way to kind of see how much natural affordable housing you can enable while still maintaining village character. And in some cases with the dormers, I would argue promoting something that is usually considered a cost add, with less value for developers. So if we go to the next slide. So you can kind of see the upper left is the existing the existing zoning code, and what it would do on this particular site in downtown. You'll notice it has only 4 units. It's got 2 staircases, and it's mostly in a hallway, and it's mostly circulation. So it's a very inefficient building. It has ground floor commercial, and in order to accommodate the parking required, it's a very expensive strategy is required. They are using tuck under, but with a commercial building type, you have to do all sorts of structural improvements and things like that in order to enable that. Where residential, you can do tuck under as like a little garage or a carport. With commercial, it becomes quite expensive. And the extreme version of this is a podium, like you see in Portland and bigger cities, where the ground floor is all concrete. And that's really, really expensive and drives up prices past the point where you're going to get any interest in development. And so another thing to highlight is, while we have a relatively small site here, the parking drives the building scale as well. In order to accommodate more parking, buildings tend to get longer and longer. This building that we're showing in the upper left is unlikely to be financially feasible due to some of the things that I mentioned. And so in order to make it financially feasible, this building would try to probably collect a couple additional lots and create one really long building. And so that might, especially when building types are driven by the scale of the car, they tend not to feel like village character. The term that we use in architecture is granularity, right? That feeling of kind of narrow buildings along the street makes it activates the street, makes it interesting and exciting, and it makes human scaled. It makes it feel like an exciting place to walk. That same kind of feeling that the existing buildings that you guys have on that street do provide. So what we see on the upper right is enabling, maintaining 2 stories in the front, allowing a 3-story fully apartment building in the back. That 3-story fully apartment building is really, really, really efficient. It's walk-up apartments and ground floor accessible apartments. Typically, they are not only naturally the most affordable building type you can provide for this level of density, but they're also right there activating Main Street, right, and providing the commercial uses in the front with customers. They're walking by it every day. And so there's a lot of value to that back building to support the Hemlock and the commercial amenities that the rest of the community enjoys. It can help kind of build up some vibrancy and more reliable off-season customers. We're getting a few upper story units on these ones as well. But what we can see if we go to the bottom left is, in addition to that 3-story apartment in the back, we're able to get a half story within the dormers and within the gable of the roof on top of those 2 stories, and I would argue maybe even maintain more of a village character, or promote more of a village character with these interesting sort of architectural features that are pretty common in the Oregon coast and kind of like rustic coastal architecture. The one on the far the bottom right is is the step back model. And I think that during the charrette, we didn't get a lot of buy-in on this one. It didn't feel quite right to folks. But it does promote more units than the one on the bottom left. And so that has that advantage to it. It also has, really nice terraces / balconies kind of overlooking the street and helping to activate the street without adding any bulk. But yeah, so these strategies and these scenarios that we were exploring were really focusing on a form-based code approach that was promoting village character rather than the current approach, which is really focused on use and density and parking. And so what we were, first of all, the other three options were not possible because none of them can fit parking. If you want to promote housing, generally that's especially in a community center, sort of like commercial area, the parking really kills projects. So we assumed no parking on any of them, and there was some pretty good buy-in at the charrette on that. We also, you'll notice that every single one of the following the three alternatives showed multiple buildings in the front, right? There was a building break, like a little courtyard between them. That's a form-based sort of design strategy that says that limits the building size, and that's something that in the survey you guys identified as something that was really critical to the village character. And so we made sure and included that in those scenarios. Yeah, and so I mean, in general, it really kind of switches from controlling the exact number of units and the number of parking spaces to controlling for village character, urban form, so that you're promoting what you want to see and the things that support a vibrant and sustainable Main Street and downtown, while removing the things that prohibit and prevent it from happening, and also in doing so, enabling the same kind of buildings that you guys love today.
I don't think that the one in the lower right, that to say that that promotes village character is laughable. Number one, it does not promote village character. I remember I was part of the charrette, and I don't think I personally ever thought it was a great idea to go up 3 stories downtown. But if you were going to do it, I mean, the one on the lower left is the only one that makes sense to me. If you think that that looks like village character on the bottom right, you're in a different village. That does not look like Cannon Beach. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you at all. I think, we wanted to explore it because we want to explore kind of the far end of each side. Well, we didn't explore 4-story buildings on Main Street, even though that, a lot of places that are a little bit bigger would say like, hey, we have to have 4-story buildings downtown. It's only viable building type. We're really looking at something smaller, and we were kind of seeing what, it was a way of gauging like what is the right, where's the right place to land here. And so I don't disagree with your interpretation of the workshop, and I don't necessarily feel that is particularly village character either from a personal standpoint.
Okay, so I'm gonna get, we're close to the end, and, Robert, can you go back one slide, please? This is just a simple diagram to say that, as we've kind of gone through all of the details of this community development ordinance today and what was amended, I think where we want to go is, away from where parking is the most dominant, important aspect of the code. And form is kind of important, but not really right sized. There's really not much option for housing that other than one size house. And there's very little attention paid to village character. So I'm saying, I think all the work that we've done up to this point is attempting to rebalance this list of important things. So form would be at the very top, and housing options would be next, the village character would be next, and parking would be last. I think that's gonna get us closer, that reprioritization will get us closer to the operational plan. And we're gonna skip over the next 2 slides and go down to the last 3 slides. We're getting close. I do want to talk about design review, and I was picking up on something that Jeff said in our last meeting where I mentioned 16 dwelling units per acre is a kind of sweet spot. for village character and villages generally. Um, it's, you know, that kind of density, 12 to 16 acre, dwelling units per acre is very good. It's kind of a traditional pattern of development. It helps communities weather different economic ups and downs. It provides housing for workers. It's an economic resilient density, and it's generally good for communities. I also think that when it comes to the shape and form of housing, we go to the next slide.
I have a question about that, the 16 buildings per acre are says 12, right?
Well, let me just, this is the easiest way to think about it. Every planner should know how much is in an acre, 43,560 square feet. That, 5,000 square feet, which is our kind of normal, that is 8 lots. So R1 gets you 8 units per acre, and, or a little bit more. And so if you go R2, which is even just an accessory dwelling unit, you're already at 16 units per acre. And so I think people think of 16 units per acre and it's like, well, my goodness, that is our normal footprint here. That is what we do here in Cannon Beach. And to ask to go even a little bit higher, is like Marcy said, it's because a lot of our lots are larger than that 5,000 square feet. So the thought is you start at that R2 or that density, and then, you know, it builds from there. And I think.
Well, and some of the lots that have a duplex and ADU currently are exceeding that.
Yeah.
that
Right, but
standard.
you get that lot size and that density and you have no landscape. And we have, I think it's on Jackson maybe, there's a house there, it's for sale now, it has a 1,500 square foot home, a garage, an ADU above it. It's brown, it's flat, there's nothing. Maybe a little patch of grass out front. So how much are you willing to give up to get that density?
And that's also why we talk sizes, you know. That's why we talk size, that's why we talk FAR, and that's why that's why we're talking median size. But, you know, it's true, people, and we have seen a growing tendency for people to maximize whatever they've got on that, lot. And, you know, I think we go back to our track one changes back in the early days of when we started pushing these ordinances through. What was the very first thing that we brought you? There was more recombining lots to get the larger mega mansions. And, you know, this is just those next steps towards that. Minimize.
So you're looking at 1,000 square foot lot on 2250 will kind of meet in the middle on that, or 2,200. And I understand that, and that's a livable home. Maybe a little cozier than some might like, but then you've got, I just see little boxes on the hillside. Doing that.
Well, that's.
I understand it's an option.
That's why I put these slides in here. I've done a lot of cataloging of middle housing around state. And some of you are seeing the books that I published, the orange cover and blue cover. They go into quite a lot of detail about the middle housing, so-called, you know, on most of these entries, I've got data for the lot size, for the dwelling size, the density. And these are all things that I think would fit very nicely into Cannon Beach. Now, these aren't large houses, but they have a lot of landscaping around them. They're very important. Landscaping is very important to the character of these. These are smaller units, generally speaking, that if we allowed them, I think they would fit in well. The density is generally 16 dwelling units per acre, 15 to 16. I put in about 12 examples from the photos in here. Right now, you don't even allow these to be built, right? Basically because of a cumulative effect of all of these figures in the code. So in the end, I do think we can go to the last slide. I think we can make really clear form-based approach that sets the size of the house and sets standards for what the most important facades should have on them, what the landscaping should be, especially between the street and the house. But that's, landscaping is a very important part of houses in Cannon Beach. In the lower left, for example, in the residential's, the small fence and the front yard. That's a really important part of the character of Cannon Beach. It's not just all about the house. So I think that we could come up with standards for all of these things and make smaller housing really work.
Hey, Marcy, what I'm missing in this, and maybe you can talk about, I missed it. I'm not seeing deed restrictions as part of these track one changes, and without those, all this goes to
No, I'm glad you asked that. Thank you.
AP double hockey sticks.
Yeah, I did spend much time talking about the public benefits that provision that we created. That is part of the code amendments package. It doesn't say everything that you need to have in it, because those are policy decisions about what would define the public benefit and how would it be granted, and how would that how would an applicant prove that they met the public benefit provision, and what would they get in exchange.
But how can you implement one without the other? I mean.
Well, it exists in its most basic form. We've defined the public benefit, but you know, your hands
Yeah,
up.
well, I was gonna say, and that's it, this is enabling lane improvement. What we're doing here is setting the buckets for policy discussions for you guys to have to fill those blanks in. It's already in there. The language talks about public benefits. I think some of the comments that we received for tonight, was asking about, how are you gonna do this work? I said, we have done this, we have done with CBAR, we're doing deed restrictions on those. Where they have to meet certain levels, and yearly show us what they're charging and that type of thing. But we're already overseeing some of these things. It's not like we're recreating wheels, other jurisdictions are doing this too. So what we see this as kind of a first step, and this, I guess, is appropriate time to kind of talk about moving forward. First thing I would do is to go to Missy and follow up with Eric's question, because I think that's kind of the first question we don't have. And how we choose or start the path forward of moving this forward. But we saw this as, enabling language, and that we would start with, talk some clear and objective parking changes, the public benefits packages, which we've only started with wetlands, a portion of the treaty, but there's also, we've talked in the past about historic cottage, saving historic cottages, and then that workforce housing element is kind of the driving portion of that. And then going back with even more granularity in the future, when we start talking about R1, R2, and R3 could possibly all be one type of district to allow for the full range of mental housing. And then to start talking about, which I think maybe was brought up at our last joint section about, where we might want more density in future growth. And so are there other areas of town that might take more commercial, more mixed use, more density, or where do we want to see just more of that? And so, I think these are going to be various paths that we might move forward through this. We have a meeting on April 28th to discuss housing opportunities, which, Marcy may light up, is that zoning is just one component of this. There's going to be other elements that we have to talk about with this. Some of that will be discussed at that April 28th meeting, but whether we want to, how much we can add to this or amend the current language, I think is our first question of, which path is going to direct us forward, because if we are allowed to do that, then maybe we push the major section, what we call this enabling language through, and then start that second pathway with the additional things that might add to that, along with some of the things we talked about. The tree, the, other parking, amendments, and, historic cottage savings in the historic area, but some of that thought. So, that's kind of how I thought, or the approach that we thought we might, take.
Our deed restrictions aren't a code amendment, how do they get?
So,
I think it would be helpful to talk about the public benefit provision as part of that.
yeah,
Yeah,
and what pages that are.
so Robert, if you pull up the old presentation, the old package. It should be right. A few pages after the presentation.
Yeah.
It's part of the package that is on the website.
Yeah, I think it's part of that one we had, from.
This is, which
And
page?
and you're going to page, let me see what page it is, 52.
Okay, so, yeah, this is in the packet that you received, and that's on the website. And it's the same language that we've been talking about. Public benefit dwellings are entitled to provision 17.30. This is a new provision that's been created, a whole new section, because it isn't really part of your zoning code, but as Jeff and I think of this the foot in the door. So establishing the enabling language for public benefit. It lays out for now, the document that, if it's okay, I'll just read it. Would that be helpful? Public benefit dwellings are entitled to provisions in 17.30 and 17.32. In order to qualify, an applicant must verify by oath or affirmation in the application that the proposed construction will meet the following occupancy requirements and public benefits upon completion of construction. Documentation must be recorded with the deed before the occupancy permit is granted. And then there are subsections. 1, once sold to the initial buyer, the dwelling unit shall remain occupied as the principal residence of the title holder receiving the public benefit housing allowances. 2, hardship exception to the occupancy requirement may be granted by Cannon Beach Community Development, or it's in brackets because it could also be a county housing authority in accordance with its policies. Such hardship exceptions may include, but are not limited to, the following circumstances. A, active military duty outside the area. B, temporary relocation to care for an ill or dying family member. Or through C, temporary relocation caused by an employer. And number 3, dwellings may only be rented for periods exceeding 12 months, and they're not eligible for short-term rental licensing. So this was intended to get the provisions set up.
It must be in the code though, that's.
Yes.
It's in the-
I'm looking at procedure.
Yeah.
Yes, this is part of the package that would be adopted.
Yeah, and if that, and we could definitely, make sure that we have, run development agreement, kind of a template to buy you guys and everything and what we want. And get the policy statements in, and ask Missy what needs to go to be added to this. Other terms of, length or whatever that you guys would want to settle on, other things like that. And that, but that's part of that next step, of coming to you, but it would be in this, yeah.
So
How do you define temporary?
Excuse me.
How is temporary defined? In those two?
Temporary relocation to care for an ill or dying family member, or temporary relocation.
Oh,
By an employer. Oh, sorry, what?
how do you define the word temporary?
I didn't write this I'm just leaving this result, that would be something I would think we want.
Okay.
Yeah. Temporary, we believe in our guidelines, are required us to have action.
Right, yeah, so we can give them this. also.
So that code called out public benefit housing. Which is affordable subsidized housing.
It's deed restricted.
It's not necessarily that, but it's housing that would provide a public benefit, and the public benefit is to is thought of as people being in Cannon Beach is the public benefit, either living in their own home that they own or renting it to someone who is living in their home to do it. So that's what is perceived as the public benefit, having, not having an unoccupied home
But it's
is
not
the public
subsidized,
benefit.
not subsidized, it's not, yeah.
And so that's what the reference to public
That
benefit
has
is.
not been, yeah, that's another one of those policy options of how you want to define that can be discussed.
Well, so usually it's federal subsidies, usually, or state
It's
subsidies.
not, it's not, let me just say, it's not. I come from mountain communities and they do not do it that way.
They don't do.
You know, not
They
at this
do
level.
not do it that way. Workforce housing and community housing in mountain town communities are often locally subsidized. You know, there's various methods, but a good portion are locally subsidized, or it's somewhat of this model where it's deed restricted over to, the workforce. They have to live within the town or the certain jurisdiction, and they have to work 30 hours a week, or, you know, there's certain, stipulations that put through policy decisions that the boards make.
And they have to sign, and it runs with the property, or sign a deed restriction.
That's what it is.
So even at night, and I think I brought this up at the last meeting, but even at a 1,000 square foot house, say, you're looking at $500 a square foot to build. And so you're still not looking at anything that's affordable. It's not affordable. What are you looking at? $3,000 a month
Right,
mortgage payment?
exactly, and that's.
And the taxes are exorbitant in Canada.
It is, and that is what I think the difficult thing for you guys to understand, because, and that's what we've been trying to say, with land prices the way they are. Yes, there is going to be subsidy likely involved in a lot of what we're discussing, because that is the future of Cannon Beach. That is the price that you are at, and there's no way to do the math around it.
No, there isn't.
I did the math of it. And yes, just for a 600 square foot, at the price of land that it is today, 600 square foot, you are still at $110,000 top end, 120 AMI, I think it was a pharmacist, under the model, that's shown in the graph, still cannot afford the 600 square foot affordable housing unit. So that is what we're saying. Yes, that is what we're all facing here in Cannon Beach. And what I've been trying to say for 5 years is what you're facing. That is the future of Cannon Beach.
Well, that's why I think about, and I understand the deed restriction. I understand where but it's gonna be, somebody's gonna be really hard pressed to deed restrict their property when they're getting a little teeny tiny house. You're gonna be hard pressed to get people to deed restrict their property.
I agree.
And there's gonna have to be some good, massive incentive for them to
It
do.
is, and that's what mountain town, that's why I say when, Lisa said, you know, most of the federal, we know they're not, it's the jurisdictions that have to do that. There are jurisdictions in Colorado and Idaho and Utah and areas like that. They charge, you know, I can't tell you what it is currently, but, you know, back 5-10 years ago, just to add 2,000 square foot to your home or whatever, you're gonna be faced with, you know, tens of thousands of dollars in subsidies to pay for that, because you're paying for the workers that allow that to happen.
And so how do local subsidies work? The local city government pays for part of the home, or?
I would let Kevin, because Kevin has dealt with it in this area more. I've done mostly in mountain town communities. They do it through a number of different ways. I mean, some do it through kind of inclusionary housing. I think Kevin was called a different term from that. But you know, it's a subsidy type of portion where you've got to give a certain 10-20%, or in lieu of fees towards that. And so with new development, you're paying for it through new development. Maybe.
I think Kevin might have been also answering the previous discussion.
Yeah.
So do you wanna say something, Kevin?
Oh, yeah, I think it's all related to this conversation. I mean, that's really kind of what my little chart was trying to get at is, yeah, you're, it's kind of showing exactly what you're saying is the land prices are so high now that there's no way for normal folks, working folks to afford them. And so the cross subsidy kind of represents like an inclusionary housing. It's a voluntary method. It's like you get bonus, you get additional units if you provide that what I call income restricted capital A affordable unit. So your property would be deed restricted, yes, but it would only impact one of the units on your site, and the rest of them would continue to be able to be rented at market rate. In some case, and I would argue, I've studied this in a number of cities with very different market pressures, construction costs, things like that. And in some places, um, where the difference between the affordable and the market rate is so extreme, you actually have to provide quite a bit of revenue generating units in addition to in order to pay for that affordable unit. I worked on a couple different affordable housing projects here in Austin, where we did cross subsidy with city direct subsidy, and then we did another what I would call taxpayer funded project, which was a big apartment building, and that had 9 funding sources, including over $3 million from the city. And they were a big chunk of that, and they were the landowners and donated the land for free, and it still took 8 other funding sources in order to get those over the table. So I would say the cross subsidy that y'all are talking about right now, where of making that public benefit unit happen, there's different ways to do it, and you really kind of have to get your pulse on the market and what it can bear. But the truth of the matter is that the more you either need to provide that property with so much incentive through fees, permitting process, but really the core is you need to allow them so many more units that they offset the cost of that affordable housing. So it's like the more expensive market rate housing, which isn't luxury housing necessarily, is paying for the affordable housing, and that's really tough to get right. And I would say that you guys have a really strong short-term rental market. It's brutal for your housing market right now. That is something that, because that is such a high revenue producing thing, and you're about to restrict it, even though there's a huge demand on it. You could potentially allow licensing with the provision of a public benefit unit. You get one STR unit, you get one public benefit unit on your site, and then you get your main house, or something like that. But you have to be able to find a mix that's gonna make these projects pencil and be, competitive with luxury housing.
Yeah, I think where this gets confusing is, on one hand, we're talking about a multi-unit development. And we're also talking about people adding a single unit. And I think it would be fair to say that we're probably going to be having a lot of discussion about what the public benefit is. And like Deanne is saying, does it make sense for people to build that second unit or a duplex if you restrict it too much? And then there's this whole other aspect of multi-units where, yes, some of them are going to be market rate, and then they're doing some kind of other public benefit. So I think this is a huge discussion that we're not going to come to an agreement tonight. And I think that's what you're saying.
I agree. And Gary, to follow up on that, there are mountain town communities that just for that accessory dwelling unit, that they subsidize that accessory dwelling unit, right? So it's just at that small, so you don't have to do the multi-unit kind of thing. So, yeah, and like you said, it's a big discussion, and what we saw of this is that it's the opportunity at least to bring forward, and because I think, what I worry about as a planner who has been working in this kind of area for 30 years is that you know, when I came here, I already saw that we were behind the ball. And so every day that or every year that goes by without addressing some type of, form to, get smaller workforce type of units, we lose the opportunity. Because I can tell you, all of the apartments that Seaside is putting up in, apartments right now, because they are not deed restricted, do we know which way they're gonna go? They're not going to be for workforce housing. And this is why every single, and we can't think just about us. We have to think regionally about this, because that's where our workforce comes from. Robert has to leave this meeting and drive up to Astoria. But, and I'm not saying as in I seriously worry about that, and it bothers me that we do not have a workforce here, and when a water line breaks, or a sewer line breaks, or a fire, or a police, that is why Mountain Time Communities demand that 20% be affordable housing or workforce housing, because those people need to live where they can pick up that phone and get here immediately.
Well, and we have. Unfortunately, all of us probably in our lives have had a commute to work.
Oh, yeah, I
Right.
did, I did an hour and a half.
So, yeah, I'm glad I don't live in the city anymore. And I'm sorry that you have to drive to Asbury tonight, Robert. But I think that, you know, I know that we're talking about code amendments tonight. But I think one thing we really need to think about is several good things have been brought to us, and it's gonna take more than, we're gonna have to skin this cat in several different ways. Randy brought up, a land trust. And, you know, I mean, there's lowering the STR, doing all of these things. So I think we can get there. Are we ever gonna get exactly what we want? Probably not. And affordable housing, not being luxury housing, but it comes at a luxury price when if you're not in a place that, I mean, $2,000, $3,000 a month for 1,000 square feet. That's a luxury price for a lot of people. And so how do we get outside of that? And I said at the other meeting, and I think this is something else that could be looked into, is finding a group of developers that need to take a loss. They need to take that loss, and they can afford to give the rent for better prices, and they take a loss on their property. Because they're making a lot of money from a lot of other people. But I agree with Gary, it's gonna take us a lot. It's gonna take a lot to get there, but having a temporary, which I don't know the definition of, plan in place, so we can at least do something to get started would be important.
Well, it is a multi-pronged thing that we need to do, various things, but at this point, I feel like we really need to stay focused on this code and do what we can there. And yes, the biggest difference we may make on the code is having expensive middle housing. But that's something that's starting to get to satisfying what our comprehensive plan calls for. It's not.
See, I don't understand that. That doesn't satisfy the need for people to
Anything.
work and live here.
We have people that have quit their.
It
jobs.
satisfies the need for what Jeff is talking about, some of it, which is we need our public works people to be able to afford to live here. We need our police officers to be able to.
Expensive middle housing do that.
It's
Is that
not
how you
more.
you? Did you say expensive middle housing?
Yes, market rate housing.
That's incredibly expensive. I mean, $2,500 for a shack, basically. That's what, a friend of mine was living in here in Cannon Beach, paying that kind of rent for a dump, really, a shack.
$1,800 to $2,200 a month for about 500 square feet.
that's not gonna solve.
Well, I mean, what I think we need to think about, and, you know, the record has shown that, and Margie, if we go back to that slide, that what we're currently producing is 70% housing for people that don't live.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so,
And if all we end up with is 0.46 FAR homes, and if we don't incentivize enough the other thing, then that's just gonna keep going bigger and bigger.
But I'm not hearing incentive. I didn't hear anything about incentive. What is the incentive?
Larger homes for,
But you're not getting a larger house. You're getting the same size house, right, with an ADU.
right,
So you're not getting a larger house.
well, you're getting a larger house that would be allowed in the future.
Well, actually, you're getting a rental. That's what you're getting. You're,
We are doing that now.
but it just doesn't, and I'm. Okay, I'm done stammering.
I just wanna say,
Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to this. So, you know, I think that you need to think about kind of some of those points, like stabilizing the market. It seems out of reach right now because you guys have been so destabilized, especially since since 2020, right? Your guys' market went crazy. It was destabilized before that, right? You guys didn't have enough housing for the folks that were trying to be here. And yeah, you had other impacts like short-term rentals, even then, vacation rentals, as well as second homes and luxury housing then. So there are some like destabilizers, but essentially you guys are dealing with, you know, income in like a kind of a really intense juxtaposition of income. And it's not from Cannon Beach, it's from elsewhere. And it's from, you know, folks that can pay hotel prices on a nightly basis. So I would say stabilizing the market is both those things. So you're gonna help with all of these prices by controlling STRs. You're also going to help by adding housing in general, right? You need more housing. Right now, you kind of are talking about these tiny apartments that are going for extra, you know, crazy prices. You know, all the data shows that if you build more apartments in, you know, more smaller units that are rentals potentially or for sale, that they actually have a impact on the older units to make them more affordable. And so by creating more housing, whether it is day one, you know, brand new townhouse isn't going to be cheap. It's going to be a brand new house, and the bigger it is, the more expensive it's going to be. But the impact of those smaller units that you're adding to the market is going to be a whole lot. It's going to be a net positive because, first of all, you're adding more units at that really competitive price point, or pushing downward forces on that price point, so long as you're not replacing one for one, right? As long as you're adding more units, you're adding smaller units, you're going to have a net benefit. It's not going to be instant, right? Those, you know, it's going to take a number of years for some of those slow market correction benefits to accumulate. And you guys shouldn't stop there. Obviously, you guys have a whole lot more plans. There was discussion during the workshop of the RV site, and there was, you know, there's a lot of discussion of, community land trusts. Like these are all really important steps. But I think that if you're not addressing the underlying market, destabilized market, that you're always going to be kind of patching the hole in the boat, right? Like you need more cushion in your market. And right now, your current strategy is only producing one type of housing, and it is not affordable to almost anybody in the community, unless you're already there, you bought in when it was more affordable. And so, sure, sorry.
well, I just want to say that I think sometimes I mean, you talk about a city, and this is not a city, this is a small town. So, you know, and the graphics that you presented, the four graphics that I found disturbing when we had the charrette, and I still find them disturbing because they look like something you'd see in a big city. And maybe they could be redone to look like something you'd see in a small town. And maybe that make it more palatable to a lot of people in the community as well. Because when you put those four graphics up there, the orangey peachy colored ones, they don't look like here at all. They look like Portland.
I think that's true if you
Seattle.
only look at them as boxes, but, you know, if you look at Cannon Beach Hotel, it's a box with certain design standards
It
that
is.
give it character. And so, and I just don't think you can,
Well, I'm telling you that when people I've talked to looked at those get disturbed by them.
I understand that, because you look at them, they're just boxes, but
And so there's-
they don't have any design standards really applied to them at this point.
And
Great, but
I'll tell you whenever I do those, not in kind of an intensive workshop like that, usually if it's going to be a public image that's going to be used for this, for policy development in a bigger community that has a bigger budget, we usually will hire a watercolor illustrator, because it allows you to get that kind of texture. It allows you to understand the architectural sort of stuff. And I've done this over and over again. And it's amazing, like how scary these SketchUp software sort of 3D model boxes can be, because they are faceless, right? And our buildings all have faces. They all have character. They all have kind of like identifying features and scale.
Referring to cities doesn't help either. This is not a city, it's a town. And I think that if you start talking about cities, you're talking about a different place. And that's important to keep that in mind.
Sure, yeah.
I know I'm not part of this, but I don't know our.
No, I anticipated we have a big audience here.
A big discussion.
Yeah.
I know Marcy's for me said this before, but my question is, when we talk about adding more units, even small units, how do we ensure these do not become very affordable second homes that remain empty for 95% of the year? So that, to me, I have no problem adding units if we are so careful that each added unit is only available for long-term rentals.
But
And
if
that's
it's so restrictive that people don't do this, then we end up with 0.46 homes that are second homes.
Rather be restricted and not have more units. Unless those units, we want to ensure that adding units is adding housing, a little bit of work here, not more location.
Well, I think our effort here is to try to satisfy what the comprehensive plan tells us we should be doing. So I'm not sure what that path is, but I don't.
Well, he
So-
talks about sorry, Eric. go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say to that point, that was my understanding of the objective of the public benefits provision is trying to take a stab at that exact concern of if we put restrictions, if we open up a bunch of available types of housing, put some restrictions on them, what stops that from becoming lots of second homes? And so that was my understanding, that was our stab, that was the stab of this, to try to figure that out. How do we make sure that people are actually living in these homes that are getting built, as opposed to just adding more to that 65% of
And I
homes
think
or
that, I
70%.
think my concern is when we start talking about all we need to do is add units, the market will correct if we just add units. That's true if we add units that are restricted for long-term use. I think that we should all keep that front and center. In a big city, you can add units without restriction because we have more space to add units. We are so space limited here, we can't just build inventory, we have to build it in a restricted way.
But on the flip side of that, and I agree with you, but on the flip side of that, he's talking about market correction. Well, so you get these this public benefit housing, and then the market starts to correct itself. So what do the people do that have rentals now? They sell. And they sell to the second homeowner, and they sell because they can't take a loss. They aren't gonna be able to lower their rent, lower their standard, because their mortgage is high. And so a correction before a market correction takes place, I don't see a market correction taking place here, because California and Jersey are gonna they're gonna come in and they're gonna buy what's available. And they're gonna continue to drive that price up. So that's my fear of adding smaller units. I like the restriction idea. But is it really going to change? Is it really going to make a change, or do we put something in on some of these smaller units that they are the way that they are now. But if they plan to sell, then it will go into a public benefit if it's written into the code, and then those properties will have to be restricted. So I think we need to build in restriction on new and anticipate to build in restriction on the market correction.
Can we do that?
I don't know, but it sounds good to me.
Yeah. Yeah, but
I'm not sure we
Just
can
don't
build
have
our
a-
units to make a market correction here.
Yeah.
with the space we have.
Yeah, with
Yeah.
the space that we have, I just don't see that there will be a market correction with the limited amount, limited space that we have.
But we could plan for it, and we could be hopeful.
I can speak to that a little bit. You know, in places that have enabled these sort of middle housing types, it's not that the existing single family houses reduce in value, right? That is it usually is already a luxury product, and it remains to be a luxury product because it has a lot of land, right? It's when the other housing there's enough of the other housing that there's other opportunities, there's cheaper options to buy and rent housing that that those ones are going to help. You know, if you look in Portland and Seattle and you look at some of the townhouses they built 15 years ago, they're a whole lot cheaper than the townhouses that are being built today, for example.
But we're not in Seattle, we're not in Portland or Seattle, and back to what Counselor Kerr said, we're not in Portland or Seattle. We don't have, that's not going to happen here. And we have luxury homes, and then we have nothing,
Mhm.
pretty
Right.
much.
Yeah, no, I
And
understand
that's
that
not gonna
entirely.
change.
I will just say, so I guess what I want to highlight is the single family homes from that are, 15 years old don't have the same impact. In fact, the single family homes that are 40 years old are oftentimes significantly more expensive than the 15-year-old townhouse. So I'm just trying to frame that, like you're creating more affordable housing options that will then become more affordable over time. But yeah, the single family house on a large lot is likely to remain a very expensive housing option in a perpetuity. And then you're not going to you're not going to get a market correction there. And so you're definitely right about that.
I just have a question. Have you been to this town yet, or have you had an opportunity to visit?
Yeah, I met you in person.
You were in the person in Charette? I don't remember that.
It's been so long ago.
Yeah, it's so long ago. Okay, I just wondered, because they,
I'm from the Northwest originally. I grew up in Spokane, and I've I used to take road trips down the Oregon coast almost annually. So I've been to a lot of them.
Sorry, I just remember seeing the screen with the pink houses, the peach colored houses. That's all I can remember.
Yeah.
So for tonight, I don't know, what this, I wasn't here when this was personally set up or anything, so I don't know what where we were wanting to get to, Barb, with this discussion tonight. But from my understanding, just a work session, to introduce it, the ordinance changes. And so that's my, I think, that was my goal. And then I would like to, as Eric said, come back to you guys at least, hopefully at your next, I don't know what the next meeting is, but at least have an answer for you from Missy on how much you're allowed to amend or whatever without going back to the top pattern and all that. Measure your work.
But that doesn't need to be communicated in the meeting. You can send us an email.
No, I can, yeah, I can get back to you, but then for the path forward is, our thought is, if you want another work session, right, before we move it to, public hearing, but that's up to you guys. I think
Yeah, we need the answer to that question and then probably.
I just want to, this came in the mail, and it was something that came before, I think the planning commission and the council. It was for a house with an ADU where the owner assured us that he wanted a variance, cut down some trees and parking variance and, for the ADU. and said he was gonna live in the house and rent out the ADU, long-term rental on the market for $1.75 million. You know, ADU on the house, I mean, less than 2 years when that was presented, so this is what happens here.
It is what, you know, I recall, like, when I walked on Grapevine the other day, it was on the market, that was pitched to our planning commission that there was gonna be a local worker that's building it and gonna live here, and it's been, and I remember that was really selling from to the planning commission back and he's.
Is it on the market now?
Yeah, that's on.
For how much?
I don't know, so that's why, you know, when we talked about deed restrictions, that's why. Because, you know, we can't guarantee, and this will lead to our next discussion, the SECs, like, I don't know if we're going to do that.
I question a couple of slides back, probably from Marcy and Kevin possibly. There was the 2 slides that have the 16 dwellings per acre, that have the examples of your middle housing from the book. Did you guys or does Jeff or anybody examine if the code amendments that are being proposed would permit these? It does.
Yeah.
Okay. And currently our code does not permit
Yeah.
any of this stuff.
Right. Because these are multiple dwellings on a lot.
And there'd still be 0.6 FAR.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
But you know, that's actually, I think, what I'm hearing is maybe a little misunderstanding about how that incentive for the FAR works. Like that, it is actually an incentive to allow somebody to gain back FAR for that public benefit, straight up. It has worked in other cities, other towns, have taken advantage of it, and we see a lot of positive action from it. But it would be good maybe to model it in friendlier looking graphics, like maybe take some of these exact examples and kind of analyze what they would be like on 5,000, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 square foot lot. We can, so people can actually see, and we could run through those development scenarios that this is what you get within the 0.6 FAR for a combination of.
Right, I think it looks like bombs, so it looks
Right,
more like.
maybe photographs like this would be better, than like pointing to it,
Right,
potential.
I just say, cause it's scary. It really is. It makes you think you're gonna lose your people in town. You know,
Yeah, it could also help us talk about that village character, characteristics.
yeah, we should talk about that. Would be an interesting discussion. What on a house makes it, you know, like, I know we know dormers do, but other things too, you know, what are those things that make a house look like it's a Cannon Beach house?
Yes, and all of these examples I selected because they are smaller houses, but they're attractive, they fit into neighborhoods, there are things, there are design qualities to these examples.
They kind of look like a beach community to me.
Mhm.
I mean, I think of Tolovana with the small lots and the little cottages on them, that's kind of what, except we're looking at them a little nicer.
And I think Kevin has something for us.
Oh yeah, just I think that the obvious thing that maybe y'all don't see it anymore, but the cedar shingles go pretty far. It's the pretty quintessential Cannon Beach. You don't see that in many other places. It's a very and I've seen really contemporary houses with cedar shingles and appropriate sort of like some sort of entry feature like a porch or stoop sort of. And those 2 things with appropriate amounts of windows and doors go really, really far. But you can obviously go significantly farther.
I'd say another place that looks just like this is the other end of Spruce Street, where all the cottages that now the conference center owns, there's you know,
Yeah.
two rows of them. And
See,
I think they're, I mean, they're beachy. I'd like to see more green space in them, but
it reminds me of.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't remember you were here, because you just said that nice thing about Cannon Beach and I was feeling bad. Oh my goodness, he was here. I forgot. I think your graphics freaked me out so much that I couldn't.
You have to let them know. Deanna, what were you gonna say?
Nothing, no, nothing.
You sure?
I thought you were going light.
So,
well, I think we do need to make it easier to build these other things than it is just to build
Right.
a big second home. I mean, I see it as our only opportunity, or this problem is just gonna keep going the direction it's going.
Like it's going all over the country.
So we agree, we're gonna have another work session, we're gonna get the answer from Missy. And hope that we get more of our community here to
we had
take
quite a,
part. Pardon me?
we had quite a few people on Zoom and then people started backing out because we were late.
Yeah.
And I think that, we might have had people stay, even Richard left. I mean, I don't know, is Richard still up there?
Everything's back, yeah, he's up there.
Is he back?
Yeah.
But I think that the, initial work up to getting to the conversation could have been pared down a little more. Because we just heard that presentation 2 weeks ago, or in the last few weeks, so.
Okay, well, the next one we won't have that presentation. Yeah, we've done.
Yeah, we really thought it was gonna be more public.
Yeah,
Yeah, but a lot of people don't understand it. I mean, as we get the letters asking questions, they indicate they don't understand what the beautification is saying, so I think it makes sense to do it. To go through it again, if we'd had a lot of people.
and they just.
We'll get 3 or 4 more steps down the line and then they'll be coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah, like the,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
fire pit.
Yeah. Okay. So we're ready to move on? Okay, fees for new units.
Okay, so we received a letter or we were forwarded a letter. And discussion from Counselor Eric Ostrander, sorry. I'm
You know, that
I'm coming back, and so anyhow, I wanted to respond to it, and what we did, we had, Tessa, our administrator, he pulled 3 of our most recent ADUs. I wanted to, look at that and say, you know, what are the fees breakout, and we provided those in the packet. And wanted to highlight that 50 to 75% of those fees are SDC charges. And we wanted to point that out, and because I think the impression, or at least what from what I read from what the memo had said, you know, was the building fees that were problems. Well, that's a different thing. I mean, it's not a different thing, but it's part of, you know, it's a granular discussion. And short SDCs are required by a different portion of the code. And I highlight that, and 316-100D says, additions to a single family dwellings that do not constitute the addition of a dwelling unit as defined by the state unit, they're exempt, okay? But these are dwelling units, that's why they're called accessory dwelling units, okay? But 316-100A, if you look at that, that says housing for low income or elderly persons, which is exempt from real property taxes under state law. And so I think the perfect time to get that memo and to get that forward and to respond is to let you guys see what is actually charged and what it's charged for. But then it gives you guys discretion, and that is why this public benefits discussion fits so perfectly with this and the housing discussions that are coming out with, because you have the ability to waive these things if you deed restrict those homes. That's what I'm saying. If you deed restrict them, there you go. No, they don't pay those taxes. They become eligible for this, low and elderly, and you can then have those fees waived. And that cuts it down, you know, and I just highlighted that 50 to 75% is the STC and parking. I mean, park fees, I didn't even go into the affordable housing ones that are also a large portion of that. And so those could be waived by you guys as part of, and we could put that in our.
And that's municipal subsidies.
Well,
Yeah,
but
that's
yeah,
it, that's.
Yeah,
part of
there's
it.
your municipal
It is.
subsidy.
It is, and that's what we did for CDOT.
Right.
Yeah, that is what we paid for CDOT.
but then you're asking an aging and one of the, in that scenario, one of the people is in very bad health, to deed restrict their home. We'll let you do this and we'll cut your fees, but you have to deed restrict your home.
You guys can make those policy kind of decisions, right, on what levels and whatever, but one I want to reply to is this, okay? I just want you to think, that's what planners have to do. We think 50 years in the future, we don't think about the person before us telling us what they want to do for their brother or for their sister or their uncle. Because that property leads to just what we're talking about, is unless we get some type of guarantee, we have no way of knowing what that's going to be. And it's not fair. It's not fair to everyone that we ask to connect. That's the other thing. We base those SDC charges on what's being added to our system and being able to maintain and build out that system. And that is how that, the months of calculations and the budget reviews and all that is done is through that. And so you have to be very careful of what you do put into those ordinances and what you waive. And that's why I wanted everyone, I love and respect people that have lived here and dedicated, but I have to think about that next family.
Right,
And
but
this is what I always say.
public benefit and the aging and things doesn't say public benefit is deed restricted.
Yeah, it does. It says right here, it says housing for income or other purposes which is exempt from real property taxes under state law.
In our code.
Yeah, that's ours.
Okay, in our code.
Oh, I don't know. That's it's from our code, yeah.
Right,
But I'm just saying, that's what your current code states. If you wanna go through, change to 5, you would still then have to ask your legal person that this is also a state requirement.
But that was pretty much, the letter we got kind of misrepresented it as that all those fees went to the building inspector fund, when actually they go to help pay for the water hookup and the water system,
Right.
because they're gonna be part of it, they go to the sewer system because they're gonna be part of it, all those things. But, like you said, that municipal support could come from waiving those fees.
Yeah, those two issues should not have been mashed together. I agree.
Well,
But what can we do on this? I mean, do we need to define what the public benefit is? And write that into the code
Or
or,
yes, I mean, that's what we would do as part of this public benefit act, what specifically it would, waive.
So I think of a lot of the stuff that was in, there are multiple letters that came in about the one for trying to develop an ADU. That when you're doing the stuff, it's not really explaining what any of the fees are for, it's just like, okay, this is the bill for this stuff, and unless you really are very well, like, at the level of us, planning commission, you're people that are in the system looking at this stuff on a relatively regular basis. Somebody in the community doesn't understand SDC water system development. I don't know why I have to pay that. It's five grand there. Like, why am I paying $5 grand to the city? This doesn't have $5 grand of value. My property, but I'm having to pay $5 grand.
and I already have water on my house.
I already have water coming from my house. Like, what additional things would be? So there's a lot of frustration. And I think that's the lens that a lot of people in the community were coming from, looking at these fees, and then the people that wrote us letters. I think that's the lens they're looking at it from. They don't understand. And I think, I don't understand why for an ADU, we have to pay for the system, development fees either. I understand for a new house and an undeveloped lot, that makes sense, but for a lot that's already developed, I don't really understand that. I think we should have an in-depth conversation about that and where does SDC fees land in the city budget and what percentage of our system is actually paid for by SDCs as opposed to water rates, but I think that's a discussion for a larger discussion right now, but I think that's the lens that those letters came in from is. If the list of prices, 5,400, 2,100, 453, like these big huge numbers, and at the end of the day, you're like, why do I have to pay $12,000?
For a little
For
teeny,
a little ADU, that's
that's
$12,000
still gonna
actually
cost you a
construction.
few $100,000 to build.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would just lean towards waiving them on an ADU myself, but
You want,
They both-
I would say towards waiving them on an ADU.
I would think it would have to be that,
So selected, I mean, there's connection fees, like that would make sense,
It's
that
right, we
we have
have to be able.
the actual connection
Could
itself.
be graduated scale.
something, you know, if they're, you know, if it's a deed restricted property, it's waived, if
There
it's,
you go, there you go.
if it's this, you know, then
But, I mean,
I
so
think Barb,
you would agree to a.
I was just gonna
restricted plan?
say, I think Barb said something about that the other day.
Well, I know, but I didn't think you agreed with it tonight,
Maybe I do today.
today.
I'm not sure.
Might change my mind.
It sounds like you're arguing against them, but
No, I'm fine with deed restrictions. I think that there's a time and a place, but ailing old people who need to build an ADU on their home, I don't think that they should be penalized and having this deed restriction on their ADU because they wanna die at home in order to get fees waived.
I don't think that,
Penalize is kind of a heavy word, though.
Well, okay, maybe it's not the right word. I'm not always the best at
well,
it.
they wanna age at home.
They
well,
do.
that could be another, if you're aging at home and you wanna die in your ADU or at home. And or your caretaker is living in the ADU, that could be another, exception. But then what happens when that property, you know, is no longer, when the person's gone, okay? I mean, you have to have a deed restriction there to stop it from being used as a high income rent.
Why? Okay.
Right, exactly.
As that flyer.
Well, I mean, yes, the place may sell for 1.75 and the ADU may end up being a rental.
People that are paying
Or-
that kind of money.
But that's-
Or something for aging parents, or something
Except
for,
if their mortgage is $10,000 a month, and do you think they're gonna charge a reasonable rate?
no, they're not gonna make their money back, but
So I see that.
it
side
may
of it.
supplement their income. I think there's a high probability that ADU like that will turn to a rental.
At the very least, at least it's an ADU, at least it's additional.
It's another dwelling unit.
As long as it's rented for a price that a normal person can afford. I mean, otherwise you just, you know. You're not gonna be able to, a fireman or a teacher isn't gonna go afford it. That's why you need to have the deed restrictions, so you can get forgiven from your system development charges and, you know, I mean, it has to all be
Yeah, it's got a
put
fence line.
together. Otherwise, people are gonna take advantage of it. Don't think they won't. I mean, we know they will.
I want that.
How do deed restrictions affect the resale of a property?
So they, usually how they work in a community, land trust model or what we've been talking about tonight. Usually then they're held that, they can, whoever's selling it gets a certain portion of what they've, you know, they're selling it for, or however it's done. And then the, next family then would, you know,
I mean, is it gonna be harder to sell a home with a deed restriction?
Absolutely.
Is it gonna be
Yep. absolutely.
less valuable as with a deed restriction?
Yes.
I can bring that back, I can bring information on that to you, because I mean, like I said, many of the communities, you know, I've already workforce housing, first housing unit I could go on. So, you know, in mountain town communities, that's all pretty much all the workforce purchase.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
It's a secondary market, is what they call it, alternative market.
It's
It's the
difficult.
workforce, and if
It's
you're
only
adding,
workforce.
just like Kevin said, you know, it becomes its own, you know, uh, flow of housing supply, and that's what they, you know, they have goals of meeting 25% of their new housing in this secondary market, so that it grows and stays competitive as well.
Well, I know I'm not normal, but I bought my house here because it had a duplex unit. And it was an income producing unit and I could afford to live here.
There you had me, I know I'm not normal.
I did mention I'm not normal, so.
But you also, what year was that?
Yeah, I mean, it was 25 years ago.
Okay.
$40,000. So give me a break.
I bought a house for 65,000. Kevin, did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to kind of speak to kind of the market for some of these deed restricted housing units. I think there's quite a few of these in places where I've worked and where I study, and also here where I live in Austin. There's a lot of these units that have been deed restricted through a number of programs. And as you're looking for a house, as I have here in the past, you see these pop up, and they do show up, on Zillow, on Redfin, whatever, as being deed restricted and having a limitation to how much income you can own or that you can have in order to buy it. But if you think about it, you're looking at the market of all this housing, and there's a lot more interest in the housing that's cheaper, right? And so yes, they are worth less, but more people can afford them, right? And so there tends to be more demand for them, and they don't sit on the market long at all. So I can kind of speak from my experience on that.
Giving that value in your home for waiving $10,000 worth of fees.
And I guess, I mean, are you talking about units in a development, or are you talking about a house with an ADU?
Well, so it's worked in multiple ways. I haven't seen a lot of places where ADUs that are deed restricted are sold, like on the market. Usually they're rented, but also it's less common for a house with a single ADU to have these types of deed restrictions. It's not as common of a model. Usually that happens with more units on a lot. Right? 3, 4. In Portland, it's 6. But you can scale that and calibrate that appropriately for your market. But yeah, I mean, usually if you have that sort of restriction, you're going to see it. It's going to be, in the description immediately on your property. And that does, and the ones that I'm talking about, I was mostly looking at individual houses. They were, the ones that were popping up were townhouses in this project that was a kind of public-private partnership with the city. So and you're right, they didn't build those units simply because they got their fees waived. But I have worked on a lot of ADUs that got their fees waived, and in exchange for agreeing to an affordability period. Usually the affordability period is short. But you can calibrate that way too. It doesn't have to be a permanent deed restriction. You can have a temporary sort of temporary restriction, that's more appropriate to people.
A full-time rental or a temporary restriction on being affordable.
Yeah.
And
The majority
I
of
can
people
just say,
don't want to be a landlord.
I can just say in Mountain Down, it's not only competitive, it's waivings. It's what it is. There's so much demand for any house, let alone affordable housing for there's waiting list and just being able to.
But these mountain towns that you speak of, that was the first home that you bought, they planned for this decades ago.
No. They've been working, some of them have, but some of them, you know, started in the nineties, some of them, you know, they got later and later, you know, but that's it. You have to start somewhere.
Right.
That's what I'm getting.
But they had a plan, they had a model that they were working out after. Oh, boy, I can't even use my words, you think I would, there's not vodka in this bottle, I promise.
Maybe that's the
Holy moly, maybe next time. But they're duplicating models, right? I mean, they start one place and it's just like big apartment complexes that started in the seventies and they just kept duplicating those.
Yeah. Well, there was
And we
certainly
did have, and we
people
stopped.
want to move back to Cannon Beach to the left. Would love to come back, you know, some of them will relocate to Seaside or Halem or Astoria or something. So I think there's still be demand for that type of housing. That,
If they wanna be a landlord, if there's a deed restriction. Do you wanna be a landlord, Steve?
Okay, anybody have any other questions on fees for new units?
I don't know, how are we gonna do something with this? I mean, I don't think anything's gonna work for the people we're talking about now, because
But it would be through the forward rates. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I didn't even think of that when you're talking about municipal support, but that makes total sense.
Anything else, Jim?
Okay. Anybody have anything for good of the order? Reminder, food pantry moving, got the refrigerators moved, thanks to the fire department to help us out today and then tomorrow from 1 to 5, and if needed, a Saturday from 12 to 4. Cause if we had a whole bunch of people show up tomorrow, we could get it done. Yeah, so, anything else?
No.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Kevin, thank you, Marcy, meeting's adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.